A treasure... Delivery truck outside. Hi guys, welcome back to another episode of Crue Trime.
Crue Trime.
Yeah, Crue Trime. If you are new here, hello. My name is Sarah, and what I do here is tell you a terrible story to ruin your day and put on my makeup at the same time. So if that sounds like fun to you, you are in the right place. So make sure you subscribe to this channel, turn on all of the notifications, and then that way you will never miss one of my terrible stories. This one is another survivor story in the spirit of happy endings during the holidays. This is the story of the Chowchilla bus kidnapping. Just a friendly reminder, I don't really feature the makeup that I'm using as I'm using it, so if you want to know what everything is, look down in the description box because everything is linked just for you. On July 15th, 1976, 55-year-old bus driver Ed Ray drove a load of local school children to a summer school day trip. It was like the second to last day of summer school, so they went out to like the Madera County Fairgrounds to go swimming for the day. There were 26 kids in all, aged 5 to 14 years old. There were 19 girls and 7 boys. Now, Chowchilla, California is in the Central Valley part of the state, so it's like rural. You know what I mean? This is a small town. Chowchilla is like a cow town. It was a very close-knit community, very quiet, very safe. So at the end of the day, Ed picked up the kids in the bus, and then he was heading back to drop them back off at Dairyland Elementary School. So the bus is just cruising on down the road in rural Madera County when it came upon a van that was parked sideways on the road, blocking it. So yeah, it's definitely weird to find a van parked sideways in the middle of the road, but Ed's first thought is, well, they must be having some kind of trouble, you know, like engine trouble. So of course he stopped the bus. Then 2 men with pantyhose pulled over their heads to obscure their faces. They approached the bus. One of them had a shotgun. 24-year-old Frederick Woods and 24-year-old James Schoenfeld essentially said, "Don't even try to pull away or we will blast through this door." So they got on board the bus, they were taking the bus and everyone on it. So one of the men got behind the wheel of the bus, you know, obviously pulled Ed out of the seat and forced him to go sit down with the kids. The other man was pointing the gun back at Ed and these terrified children. There was also a third man, an accomplice. It was James's 22-year-old brother, Richard, who followed behind the bus in their van. So bus driver Ed was a very calming presence for the children. He did his best to keep them quiet and reassured that everything's gonna be okay, like we're gonna be fine. You can imagine that this must have been really tough to do with the kids as young as they were, you know, some as young as 5 years old. And there were scary men with distorted faces, pantyhose faces, pointing guns at the kids. Anyway, so the bus drove further into the countryside, and you know, this area of California is vast. There's a whole lot of nothing out in central California. The bus finally stopped in a dry riverbed with a bamboo grove, and the bamboo had grown so tall it was like taller than the bus. Perfect hiding spot. There was also another van parked there waiting for them. Hidden. Okay, so it's pretty clear this is a very elaborate scheme, one that's been planned out. So these men, these kidnappers slash robbers, they start moving the kids from the bus into these vans, starting with Ed, of course. They force him out of his seat at gunpoint, and they had backed the van up to the door of the bus so that you could jump straight from the bus into the van without touching your foot to the ground and leaving any footprints. So half of the kids get into one van, and then they stop, move that van out of the way, back up the second van, and then keep loading. And these vans had been heavily modified. There were no seats, of course, and the interior had been reinforced with like wooden paneling that essentially blacked everything out. There was no way to see out from inside and no way to see inside from the outside. Do you get what I'm saying? The point is, when you were inside this van, you were not getting out of it, and there was no way for you to know where you were going because you couldn't see. And these vans were also hot AF inside, okay? It's July in Central California. There was no ventilation, no air conditioning, and there's like 13 sweaty children inside. With everybody loaded up in the vans, they took off, and they drove like that for hours and hours and hours. No air, no light, no food, no bathroom, no nothing. Okay, so this abduction, reloading, relocating, kidnapping, it took some time, more time than it would have taken to drive the kids home from this swimming trip. So it's like after 4 p.m., that's when Ed should have been back with the kids on the bus. The parents are starting to notice their kids are not home. Nobody can reach Ed. Obviously, there's no cell phones, it's the 70s. So by nightfall, they're forming search parties and they're going out assuming that, of course, this bus just must be broken down on the side of the road someplace, right? Wrong, they can't find the thing. A police helicopter got in the air, right, and was flying about and pretty quickly did find the bus in that bamboo grove. They only could find it from like up above. And that was about 9 miles outside of Chowchilla. So the county sheriff, Ed Bates, went out to the bus. It was, of course, empty. But he did notice the tire tracks that had been backed up to the bus. Something really, really messed up was going on here. So the sheriff, of course, has very limited resources in the middle of nowhere, California, so he called in reinforcements, the FBI and other agencies, to come and help. So within hours, about 30 FBI agents were on the case, and, they're out looking and they're not finding anything. And pretty soon, it was the next day. There's no word from the kidnappers, no ransom, nothing. So we now know that the kidnappers actually did try to call in their ransom demand, but the phone lines into the Chowchilla Police Department were so jammed up with concerned parents, concerned citizens, people who think they might have seen something, and also, news reporters, they couldn't get through. So the kidnappers decided to just try again later, so they fell asleep. How stupid. Meanwhile, these vans have been driving essentially all night, like over 12 hours. When they finally did stop, they started taking everybody out, Ed first and then the kids, each one at a time. And it was before the sun had come up, so it was dark and sort of impossible to know where they were. The desert, the mountains, who knows? Also, they're pulling these kids out of the van one by one and leading them into the dark. And the kids that are left behind are thinking, oh my, what is happening? Are they leading us out into our death? So what was happening was these kidnappers were leading the kids away one by one and they were collecting information, their names and ages. Then they led them through the dark to a hole in the ground and told them to climb in. So this hole in the ground had a ladder that went down into some weird room. What it was a semi-truck trailer that had been buried in the ground. Inside this trailer was a table, some mattresses, jugs of water, some food like bread and peanut butter, and there were some crude toilets, which were essentially just holes cut in the wheel wells. The holes were definitely not big enough to climb through, but big enough to, potty through. There were also tubes of some kind, and they could hear the sound of fans, so there was definitely some kind of ventilation system that was hooked up. So, as I said, one by one, each of the kids and the bus driver, Ed, climbed into the trailer, and then the kidnappers took the ladder, pulled it up through the hole, then they closed up the opening with a manhole cover, then they weighed it down with these 100-pound industrial batteries, like 2 of them. And then they covered that with this wooden box, and then they filled it in with dirt. Those 27 people, 26 kids plus 1 adult, could hear the dirt filling in, and they were buried alive. Exhausted and totally bewildered, Ed knew that they needed to get some rest if they were going to have the energy to try to get out of this underground prison. Well, hours passed, and then it started to get really bad.
How could they get any worse?
The food ran out, the water ran out, the fans stopped working, so no new air was being drawn into this trailer, and there's 27 bodies, hot, breathing, crying. There's only 1 very dim light down there, just nightmarish. So then Ed and one of the older boys, 14-year-old Michael Marshall, decided they needed to inspect, right? They're looking all around every inch of this trailer trying to figure out how to get the fuck out of it. But the only way out was the way they got in, this hole in the ceiling. But there's this heavy manhole cover with these heavy batteries, and it's just Ed and a bunch of kids. So they're underneath it, they're pushing with all their might, but it's like not moving. So Ed and the kids stacked up everything that was inside the trailer, all of the table, the mattresses, all of that, so that they could reach up to this manhole cover. The kids took turns standing on Ed's shoulders, trying desperately to push up on this manhole cover until finally it shifted. 14-year-old Mike was able to wedge a piece of wood into the opening, giving Ed some leverage, enough to open it so that Mike could squeeze up through that opening. So as I said, weighing down the manhole cover were those 2 super heavy batteries, and then there was a large wooden box. So Mike was able to squeeze up into this box with the determination and energy that only a 14-year-old boy has. And then he was punching and kicking at it until it finally broke, and then he started digging through the dirt to try to get out. He dug and dug and dug and dug some more until finally light poured into the hole. They'd done it. They were free after being trapped underground for 16 hours. Mike was the first one out of the hole, but he didn't know if he was about to walk right into one of the kidnappers standing there with a gun. But the coast was clear. So Ed from inside was lifting the kids up out of the hole so that they could get up to the surface, and Mike was there to help pull them out. So it was a perfectly sunny day. They could see that they were in the hills somewhere, and then they saw excavating equipment and conveyor belts, and it looked like the Flintstones. Where they were was a rock quarry in Livermore, California, more than 100 miles from Chowchilla. Well, pretty soon, these workers at the quarry in these hard hats noticed these 27 people that just emerged out of literally nowhere. So the police arrived, and they found the missing children and the bus driver all present and accounted for and largely physically unharmed. Remember I said that the kidnappers couldn't get through to make their ransom demand because the phone lines were all jammed up? What a bunch of dum-dums, these kidnappers. Oh my God. So by the time they woke up from their little nappy nap and they were ready to, make their ransom call, they saw that the news had broken that the kids had freed themselves. Shit! Or, great. Well, Ed and the children were taken to a nearby rehab facility. It was kind of the only place close by that could hold all of them together. They were photographed, fed, given, water and fresh clothes to wear, like prison jumpsuits. They were examined by doctors, and each one was questioned separately by investigators. So that whole process took about 4 hours, to question everybody separately. They were put on a charter bus and returned to Chowchilla, where they were reunited with their families. All in all, it was about 36 hours from when they were first abducted. So the investigators swarmed the quarry, digging up this underground trailer. It was an old moving truck, which explains why it was so big. So whoever hid this thing at the quarry must have had access to this property, because the road leading into the compound was gated. So who had keys? The California Rock and Gravel Quarry in Livermore was owned by Frederick Nickerson Woods III, and his 24-year-old son, Frederick IV, had keys and unfettered access and free use of all the facilities. So once the investigators reviewed the security ledger, it was revealed that Fred and his 2 friends had been spotted there digging a large hole on the property a year before, months before. And shitty shithead Fred, despite coming from a very wealthy family, had been pinched 2 years earlier for grand theft auto. But not just Fred. Also arrested with him were his 2 shitty shithead friends, brothers James and Richard Schoenfeld, also from a very wealthy family. The 3 of them were able to wriggle out of prison time and instead were sentenced to probation. This is just a classic case of spoiled rich kid brat entitled syndrome. Is that a syndrome? Did I just make that up? Well, James and Fred were also in business together. They owned a small used car lot, but they were lazy, entitled, and it was just easier to steal, I guess. So the FBI issued search warrants for Frederick Wood's sprawling family estate, and they found in Frederick IV's living space a treasure trove of evidence. They also found the 2 vans that were used to transport the children, these modified vans. They found a draft of this ransom note. This is ridiculous. They found maps, notes, receipts, journals, guns, and they found a hamburger wrapper with the names and ages of all the children that were kidnapped. You guys, it was a total jackpot. The police probably could have strung up all these 3 turds with like 1 or 2 of these pieces of evidence, but like this was everything. One of the documents they found was labeled "The Plan." Come on. The point is, these ding-dongs had been planning this for a long time. This was a very detailed, premeditated situation. Arrest warrants were issued for Wood and the Schoenfeld brothers, and the younger Schoenfeld, Rick, surrendered to the authorities pretty quickly. But it took another 2 weeks to track down the older guys because they fled. One was caught near the border, and then the other one, Fred Wood, was caught in Canada. Well, these 3 shitty shitheads told the police that the reason that they came up with this scheme to kidnap children for ransom is because they were in very serious debt. And also children would be easier to control and they'd be worth a lot ransom-wise. And they needed a lot of kids to make it worthwhile, I guess. They had planned to demand $5 million from the state of California for the safe return of the children, and that's over $25 million in today money. So essentially caught red-handed with all the plans, these 3 turds decided to plead guilty to kidnapping for ransom and robbery, but they refused to plead guilty for this infliction of bodily harm charge because that would have sent them to prison for life without parole because it would have been coupled with kidnapping. Well, they went to trial on those extra charges. A few of the children actually took the stand and testified as to the impact of their mental and emotional trauma, in addition to the cuts and scrapes that they sustained while being buried alive. The 3 men were, in fact, found guilty and were sentenced to the maximum punishment, which was life in prison without the possibility of parole. But the decision was later overturned after it was argued that the injuries that the children had sustained, cuts and scrapes, bruises, did not actually meet the legal standard for bodily harm. I mean, does bodily harm not cover like invisible injuries, mental trauma? Guess not. Anyways, the 3 men were resentenced to life with the possibility of parole. In 2012, a 57-year-old Richard Schoenfeld was released on parole after serving 36 years in prison. James was released 3 years later. Now, getting through a parole board was much harder for Fred, as he was the mastermind of this terrible scheme. He was denied parole over 17 times. He was unapologetic, arrogant, and kind of a problem inmate, racking up numerous, disciplinary infractions for possession of contraband and stuff. But finally, in 2022, 70-year-old Fred Woods was granted parole after serving 46 years in prison and was released. The 26 children from Chowchilla that were kidnapped and held captive have spent the rest of their lives suffering from panic attacks, nightmares. They've developed irrational fears, depression, and substance abuse problems. In 2016, the 25 surviving victims settled a civil lawsuit against their kidnappers. They each received an undisclosed amount paid for by Frederick Wood's trust fund that was, quote, enough to pay for some serious therapy, but not enough to buy a house. The very courageous bus driver, Ed Ray, was awarded a California School Employees Association citation for outstanding community service. And the Sports and Leisure Park in Chowchilla, California was later renamed the Edward Ray Park. And his birthday, February 26th, is also celebrated annually in Chowchilla as Edward Ray Day. And that is the story of the Chowchilla bus kidnapping. That story is crazy, you guys. Also, what's going on with these recurring themes of like underground bunkers and kidnapping?
I don't know.
Anyways, if you have a Crue Trime story that you want to recommend to me, I would love to hear from you. So look down in the description box. There's a link to a Google Doc. You click it, fill out all the dirty details. Thank you so much for hanging out today and for watching this video. I really appreciate it. If you want to see more videos like this one, then consider subscribing to this channel before you leave today. I upload new videos here on YouTube every week, and you can follow me on all of the other socials as well. That is it for now. I will catch you next time in the next video. Bye! Peter, I'm going to murder you if you don't stop. Anyway. A treasure... The story is nuts. Where they were reunited. And there were some makeshift... I am hot.